July 22, 1996, 12:45 p.m. The Paramount Studios commissary, Harrison Ford, was sitting alone at his usual corner table, reading a script and eating a sandwich, when Tom Cruise walked across the room with the confident swagger of Hollywood's newest golden boy. At 34, Cruise was riding high on the success of Mission Impossible, which had just become the biggest action movie of the year. Harrison, at 54, was still a massive star, but whispers were growing that his best days were behind him. What happened next would ignite the most explosive rivalry in modern Hollywood history, a 15-year war that would reshape action cinema and force two generations of movie stars to battle for the soul of the genre itself. "Mind if I sit down?" Cruise asked, not waiting for an answer as he slid into the booth across from Harrison. His smile was perfectly calibrated, the same megawatt grin that had charmed audiences worldwide, but there was something else underneath it, something that made Harrison immediately wary. "Harrison," Cruise said, leaning forward with the intensity that would define his career, "I just want you to know, I have nothing but respect for what you've accomplished. Indiana Jones, Han Solo, all of it. But the old guard's time is over. Action movies belong to a new generation now." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Harrison set down his script and looked directly into Cruise's eyes. After 20 years in Hollywood, Harrison could recognize a declaration of war when he heard one. And Tom Cruise had just fired the opening shot in a battle that would consume both men for the next decade and a half. "Is that so?" Harrison replied, his voice calm but carrying an edge that anyone who knew him would recognize as dangerous. "And what exactly makes you think the old guard is finished?" Cruise's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. "Box office numbers don't lie, Harrison. Mission Impossible just proved that audiences want something different. They want heroes who don't get old, who don't slow down, who can do things that seem impossible. They want perfection." Harrison Ford had been in Hollywood long enough to know that this conversation wasn't really about box office numbers or audience preferences. It was about something much more fundamental, the very nature of what it meant to be an action hero. And Tom Cruise was essentially arguing that Harrison's entire approach to the genre was obsolete. "Tom," Harrison said, choosing his words carefully, "I've been making action movies since before you could drive. And I've learned that audiences don't want perfection. They want humanity. They want to see heroes who can get hurt, who can fail, who can make mistakes and still find a way to win. That's what makes them heroes." The philosophical divide couldn't have been clearer. Harrison Ford represented the old school of action filmmaking, heroes who were fundamentally human, who succeeded through determination and ingenuity rather than superhuman abilities. Tom Cruise embodied a new philosophy, action stars as aspirational figures, nearly invincible protagonists who could accomplish anything through sheer will and physical perfection. "Maybe that worked in the 80s, Cruise said, his tone becoming more aggressive, "but this is 1996. Audiences are more sophisticated now. They want spectacle. They want to see things they've never seen before. They want their heroes to push beyond human limitations." Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying the younger actor with the kind of analytical gaze that had made him famous for playing intelligence operatives and archaeologists. What he saw was talent, ambition, and an almost manic need to prove himself as the best action star of his generation. "Tom, can I ask you something?" Harrison said. "When you're up there hanging from helicopters and climbing buildings, what are you trying to prove?" The question clearly caught Cruise off guard. For a moment, his carefully maintained composure slipped, revealing something more vulnerable underneath. "I'm trying to give audiences an experience they can't get anywhere else," Cruise replied, but his voice lacked the confidence he had shown earlier. "I'm trying to make movies that matter. And you think the only way to make movies that matter is to risk your life for stunts that could be done with special effects?" Harrison's question went to the heart of what would become their fundamental disagreement about the nature of action cinema. Cruise believed that authenticity came from real physical danger and impossible feats. Harrison believed that authenticity came from emotional truth and character development. "Harrison," Cruise said, his intensity returning, "you're from a generation that accepted limitations. My generation doesn't believe in limitations. When I hang from that helicopter, audiences know it's really me up there. They know I'm really doing it. That's not just spectacle, that's truth. No, Tom, Harrison replied, his voice growing harder. That's ego. There's a difference between serving the story and making the story about you. And right now, you're making every movie about Tom Cruise the daredevil instead of about the character you're supposed to be playing. The accusation hit its mark. Cruise's jaw tightened, and for the first time in their conversation, his famous smile completely disappeared. At least I'm not sleepwalking through my performances. Cruise shot back. At least I'm not coasting on characters I created 20 years ago. When was the last time you took a real risk, Harrison? When was the last time you pushed yourself beyond your comfort zone? The insult was perfectly targeted. Harrison had been feeling increasingly frustrated with the types of roles he was being offered, mostly sequels and variations on characters he had played before. Cruise had identified his deepest professional insecurity and weaponized it. You want to talk about risk? Harrison said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The real risk is caring more about the character than about looking cool. The real risk is making choices that serve the story instead of serving your image. But I wouldn't expect someone who treats every movie like a personal stunt reel to understand that. What happened next would define their relationship for the next 15 years. Cruise leaned forward, his eyes blazing with competitive fire. You know what, Harrison? Let's see who's right. Let's see whose approach audiences prefer. Because I guarantee you that in 10 years nobody's going to remember Indiana Jones, but they'll still be talking about Ethan Hunt. Harrison Ford smiled for the first time since Cruise had sat down, but there was no warmth in it. Tom, people have been trying to replace Indiana Jones for 15 years. Good luck. Cruise stood up, straightening his jacket with sharp, angry movements. We'll see, he said, and walked away without another word. What neither man realized at the time was that their confrontation would reshape not just their careers, but the entire landscape of action cinema. Word of their philosophical divide spread quickly through Hollywood, and soon filmmakers, studio executives, and other actors were forced to choose sides in what became known as the Ford-Cruise War. The battle lines were clearly drawn. On one side were the traditionalists who believed in Harrison's approach, character-driven action, with real emotional stakes and human vulnerability. On the other side were the modernists who embraced Cruise's philosophy, spectacle-driven action with superhuman protagonists and impossible stunts. The first major battle came in 1999, when both men had films opening within weeks of each other. Harrison was starring in Random Hearts, a romantic thriller that showcased his dramatic range. Cruise was releasing Mission Impossible 2, which featured even more elaborate and dangerous stunts than the original. The box office results seemed to vindicate Cruise's approach. Mission Impossible 2 was a massive global hit, while Random Hearts underperformed. Hollywood trade papers ran articles suggesting that Harrison Ford's era was ending and that Tom Cruise represented the future of action cinema. But Harrison wasn't finished. In 2008, at age 66, he returned as Indiana Jones in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Despite mixed reviews, the film was a huge commercial success, proving that audiences still hungered for the kind of grounded, human action hero that Harrison had pioneered. Meanwhile, Cruise's relentless pursuit of ever more dangerous stunts was beginning to take its toll. Injuries on the Mission Impossible sets were becoming more frequent and more serious. Insurance companies were becoming reluctant to cover productions featuring Cruise's elaborate stunt work, and some critics were beginning to argue that his films were becoming more about watching Tom Cruise risk his life than about telling compelling stories. The turning point came in 2018 during the production of Mission Impossible: Fallout. Cruise broke his ankle performing a building-to-building jump that shut down production for weeks and cost the studio millions of dollars. As he lay in the hospital, Cruise reportedly had a moment of reflection about whether his approach to action filmmaking was sustainable. At the same time, Harrison Ford was dealing with his own physical limitations. Injuries from plane crashes and on-set accidents were catching up with him, forcing him to rely more heavily on stunt doubles and special effects. But rather than seeing this as a defeat, Harrison began to embrace it as an evolution. I've realized that the most important stunts happen in here, Harrison said in a 2019 interview. tapping his chest. "The physical stuff is just window dressing. The real action is emotional. It's about making choices that matter, about caring enough about the character that the audience cares too." The final phase of their rivalry came when both men had to confront the reality of aging in an industry obsessed with youth. Cruise, now in his late 50s, was still performing his own stunts, but facing questions about how much longer he could continue. Harrison, approaching 80, was preparing for his final performances as Indiana Jones and Han Solo. Their last face-to-face encounter came at a Hollywood charity event in 2020. Both men were older, perhaps wiser, and certainly more aware of their own mortality. According to witnesses, they spent nearly an hour talking privately, and when they emerged, both seemed changed by the conversation. "Tom and I may have approached action movies differently," Harrison said in a rare comment about their relationship, "but we both cared passionately about the craft. Our rivalry pushed both of us to be better, even if we didn't always appreciate it at the time." Cruise, for his part, seemed to have gained new respect for Harrison's approach. "Harrison taught me that spectacle without character is just noise," he admitted in a 2021 interview. "I may have disagreed with his methods, but I never questioned his commitment to the work." The ultimate legacy of the Ford-Cruise rivalry is visible in today's action cinema, which has found ways to incorporate elements of both men's philosophies. Modern action heroes like those in the Marvel Cinematic Universe combine spectacular set pieces with character development and emotional vulnerability. Directors have learned to balance practical stunts with digital effects to create maximum impact while minimizing risk. But perhaps the most important lesson from their 15-year war is that creative conflict, when it comes from genuine passion for the craft, can elevate everyone involved. Harrison Ford and Tom Cruise pushed each other to explore new possibilities within the action genre, even as they disagreed about what those possibilities should be. Their rivalry forced Hollywood to examine what audiences really wanted from action movies: pure spectacle or emotional truth, superhuman heroes or vulnerable protagonists, impossible stunts or believable characters. The answer, it turned out, was both. The best action movies found ways to deliver spectacular set pieces while maintaining character integrity and emotional stakes. Today, both men are in the twilight of their careers, but their influence on action cinema is undeniable. Harrison Ford proved that audiences would follow a character through decades of adventures if that character remained emotionally honest and fundamentally human. Tom Cruise demonstrated that properly executed practical stunts could create a level of excitement and authenticity that digital effects couldn't match. Their secret war reshaped Hollywood by forcing filmmakers to think more carefully about the balance between character and spectacle, between human drama and superhuman action. It proved that rivalry, when channeled constructively, could push an entire genre to new heights of achievement. The Ford-Cruise rivalry also highlighted the generational tensions that constantly reshape Hollywood. Every era produces new stars who challenge the established order, and every established generation must find ways to evolve or risk being left behind. Harrison and Tom's battle was ultimately about more than just action movies. It was about artistic legacy, professional relevance, and the eternal question of how to remain vital in a business that worships youth. In the end, both men won their war by refusing to compromise their core beliefs while remaining open to evolution. Harrison learned to embrace new technologies and filmmaking techniques while maintaining his commitment to character-driven action. Tom discovered that even the most spectacular stunts need emotional context to truly impact audiences. Their rivalry changed action movies forever by proving that there was no single correct approach to the genre. Instead, the best action films would be those that found unique ways to balance spectacular action with compelling characters, impossible stunts with emotional truth, and superhuman feats with human vulnerability. Harrison Ford's secret war with Tom Cruise may have started with a confrontational lunch at Paramount Studios, but it ended with both men having enriched the action genre and inspired a new generation of filmmakers to push boundaries while respecting the fundamental elements that make action cinema truly exciting. Sometimes the most important battles in Hollywood are fought not over contracts or billing, but over artistic philosophy and creative vision. And sometimes, the greatest victories come from learning that your biggest rival might also be your most valuable teacher.